I've been in all kinds of storms. I've never been frightened except in Lake Superior.
Towering waves and howling winds, pulling terrified sailors to their watery graves.
Just makes your blood run cold of the size of the waves that were sweeping down the decks. All the while you know that there's no rescue at hand, that the water will kill you with the cold, and you will perish.
Legendary vessels shipwrecked on the Great Lakes.
Steel-hulled ships, all in their prime, all succumbed to the weather and to this one particular storm.
Here you are at the site of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the most famous of the 6,000 ships that have gone down on the Great Lakes. You know there's 29 souls right here.
They have a surface area of over 95,000 square miles, and their icy depths hold 1/5 of the Earth's fresh water. Awesome and timeless, they are the Great Lakes, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. Together, they are America's busiest inland waterway, supporting commerce and life itself for the entire region. The Great Lakes also have a dark side. Wicked storms of incredible fury that can threaten any vessel caught in their grip. The lurking danger of Great Lakes storms lies in the high frequency of their waves. Bone-chilling walls of water strike vessels in rapid succession, a deadly force known as their chop, more sinister than the great swells of the ocean.
A 30-foot sea in the ocean is not near as frightening as a 30-foot chop in Lake Superior. The seas in the lakes just beat you to death. It's a constant hammering.
Hundreds of feet deep, the cold, silent bottoms of the Great Lakes are littered with the broken hulls of more than 6,000 vessels. The human cost is estimated at 30,000 lives over the past 2 centuries. Most feared of all storms is the November Witch, punishing maelstroms that sweep across the lakes as winter makes its first approach. One November Witch stands alone as the most violent and deadly storm ever to strike the lakes, the Great Storm of 1913. November has traditionally been a busy time on the lakes. Iron ore and coal freighters make their last runs before winter weather brings the shipping season to a close. In 1913, the largest of these vessels were more than 500 feet long, steel-hulled and powered by massive steam engines. Tucked among these giant boats was a small freighter called the Regina, named for the capital of Saskatchewan, Canada. At 250 feet in length, the Regina was perfectly suited to serve tighter harbors, inaccessible to the bigger boats.
You could think of her as being a floating UPS truck, because her job was to visit all of the small Canadian ports in Upper Lake Huron and on up through Lake Superior, delivering the daily consumer goods. She typically carried a cargo of whiskey, perhaps some champagne, perhaps some construction material for the hardware store.
Captain Edward McConkey was the proud shipmaster of the Regina. McConkey had a passion for working the lakes, and at 34, he was one of the youngest captains in the industry. His crew numbered about 20 men, mostly able young Canadians like himself.
My grandfather, Captain Ed, was a very happy, happy sailor. He loved his work, he loved his crew. He was very proud of his ship and the way he could navigate it. He would love to have his wife, Amanda, come and spend a week or two with him. And also his young children would accompany their mother to visit Papa on the ship.
While on the lakes, Captain McConkey maintained a diary, dutifully recording each day's activities as well as thoughts of his wife and children. On Friday, November 7th, the Regina was in Sombra, Ontario, loading 140 tons of baled hay before heading north into Lake Huron. In his diary, the captain tersely noted the weather: hazy, cloudy, and wind. The weather was unseasonably mild that first week of November, with temperatures in the 70s and the lakes as smooth as glass. Experienced captains were suspicious of this calm.
Some of these sailors had an intuition, a sixth sense, if you will, this yearning in the pit of their stomach that something wasn't right, something big was coming.
This intuition would serve them well. Two huge storm fronts were beating direct paths toward Lake Superior and northern Lake Michigan. On the morning of the 7th, storm warning flags were raised in ports all around the upper lakes. Captains and crews secured their hatches and prepared for rough weather. But with end-of-the-season schedules to be met, remaining in port was not an option.
There was a real attitude, too, that we can tough it out, that we can make it, that this is 1913, I've got this great big brand new steel ship, and there's nothing out there that I can't bull my way through.
Around midday on November 7th, the two storm fronts collided, creating sudden, fierce conditions more treacherous than expected. The temperature dropped sharply, and winds topped 50 miles per hour as the water convulsed in 20-foot waves. Captains and crew struggled against the towering seas.
It's a very eerie feeling when you get down in the bottom of one of them troughs and all you can see for as far as you can see behind you is water, and all you see for as far as you can see ahead of you is water.
By its second day, the storm had intensified, claiming vessels all across the upper lakes. The steamer Leafield was dashed against rocks on a Lake Superior island. With her hull ripped out, she was dragged back into the raging seas, where she sank into the icy water, taking all 18 crewmen with her. In upper Lake Michigan, the barge Plymouth and her 7-man crew were anchored off the coast of a tiny island. The tugboat that was towing the Plymouth had been unable to make headway in the tempest and was forced to abandon her to the elements. The Plymouth's crew had no alternative but to wait and hope that their wooden vessel would outlast the punishing storm. In the pre-dawn hours of Sunday, November 9th, the Regina was loading cargo in Sarnia, Ontario, near the southern end of Lake Huron. Conditions there were breezy but calm. By now, the storm raging on the upper lakes was on its third day, but captains across the region believed it would soon run its course and subside. At 7 a.m., the Regina began its journey north, fading into the huge expanse of Lake Huron, unaware of what lay ahead. By mid-morning that Sunday, the storm that had raked the upper lakes had not let up as predicted. Instead, it spread eastward to include all of Lake Huron. Then it was joined by a menacing partner in the form of a huge tropical front speeding north from the Gulf of Mexico.
And it went wandering into this area of cold air, places that tropical storms almost never go. and it just went crazy. And the storm exploded. It grew exponentially.
Winds of up to 100 miles per hour would blow for an unprecedented 16 hours, with wave heights reaching 35 feet.
It just makes your blood run cold of the size of the waves that were sweeping down the decks, of diving in the green water with your bow, being out there when the wind exceeded 85 miles an hour, and you're fighting for your life in that boat.
The Regina and dozens of other vessels on Lake Huron that day were heading full steam into the fiercest storm in recorded Great Lakes history. Back in a moment with Shipwrecks on the Great Lakes, here on the History Channel.
Aren't there enough reasons in your life to talk to your doctor about Zocor? To learn more about Zocor, ask your doctor. Zocor, be there.
When you combine Reese's Peanut Butter Cups and Crispy Wafers, the combination is irresistible. Reese Sticks, the crisp you can't resist.
Okay, we know there are enough calling plans on this planet.
Yeah, it's way too complicated. Make it simple.
I will. You see, with the new AT&T One Rate 7-cent plan, it's nothing but simple. It's 7 cents a minute all day, every day, whenever you call. There are no 10 numbers to dial.
Or those nickel rates that are sometimes a quarter.
No, that was not me. With AT&T One Rate, it's simple, period. So what was confusing is now not.
I like simple.
Simple is good.
And tomatoes.
Even better.
All day, every day. Call 1-800-41-RATE to enroll.
We need 2 tripods?
A while back, one of our customers was promised that when the new, larger Saturns came in, he'd be the first to get a test drive.
Look at that.
But when the cars came in, the customer was out.
Hey, Ron. How's Norway treating you?
But a promise is a promise.
What?
Let's try it a little looser.
Looser?
And so a couple of our retailers put together a little video for him.
German engineering. Nice, huh?
A sort of virtual test drive to show off the bigger engine and new suspension.
Feel how smooth?
A lot of handheld stuff, a lot of pans and stuff.
Yeah, why don't we get a close-up of these panels?
And while they may not be the most accomplished filmmakers, at least there's a customer out there who knows a little more about our new, larger Saturn LS.
You know, we never got to use the second tripod.
But more importantly,
Boy, it's a big trunk. We should get a shot of it.
a whole lot more about Saturn.
This is good stuff.
All next week on the History Channel, they are the first defense. Their design, top secret. Their existence, world known. Engineered to overcome the threat of war.
Military superiority will belong to those nations who create the next great technology.
Sometimes the best defense is a strong offense. Battle Stations Week on Modern Marvels. All next week on the History Channel.
Now back to Shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. On Sunday, November 9th, 1913, dozens of vessels were locked in a death struggle against the most violent Great Lakes storm on record. On Lake Huron, the Canadian freighter Regina was northbound, making little headway and taking a terrible beating against the storm. Blinding snow accompanied winds that reached 100 miles per hour. The icy waves crested at over 30 feet in unrelenting chops. Below deck, the Regina's engineer and stokers ran her steam engine at full speed in a desperate effort to gain leverage against the maelstrom. The Regina's cargo shifted in her hold. She began to list badly to her right side and started taking on water. The Regina's 34-year-old captain, Ed McConkey, was faced with the 2 words that are every captain's nightmare: abandoned ship.
This was his first command, the first ship he had been entrusted with, and he's going to lose it. But he knows every member of his crew personally. He knows their families. He knows the towns they're from. He knows he has to do the very best he can to save their lives.
One of Regina's 2 lifeboats was successfully launched into the savage waters of Lake Huron. But within minutes, the terrified crew was doused with bone-chilling water. In spite of their heavy clothing, the men now faced a second deadly threat: hypothermia.
What kills on the Great Lakes isn't always the water. You don't always drown. You just freeze to death. It's the hypothermia, the combination of the cold water, the spray, and the piercing wind going through your heart.
After helping his crew abandon ship, Captain McConkey remained on board, alone. The captain secured his diary inside his uniform and prepared for his reckoning. He sounded the Regina's distress whistle in the distant hope of rousing a life-saving crew from shore.
A young man like that, so alone out in those awful, awful winds and high waves. He loved his ship so much, and to have to abandon ship, I just feel so sorry for him and proud that he stood there.
After 5 horrific days of punishing the lakes, the storm finally subsided on Wednesday, November 12th. The entire region held its breath, waiting for boats to come in. Many never did. Instead, the lakes offered up macabre vestiges of once mighty freighters, sections of lifeboats, oars, cabin doors, and bodies.
When these little communities along the Canadian shore began to find the bodies on the beach, the telegraph wires that were down began to be reestablished. Then, and only then, was the true horror of this storm becoming apparent.
In Port Franks, Ontario, the Regina's lifeboat drifted onto the beach with 3 crewmen still aboard, dead from exposure. Near the town of Goderich, Ontario, the bodies of 25 mariners washed ashore. They drifted in, alone and in small groups, some encased in ice. This grisly homecoming continued for a week. On Michigan's west coast, the current carried in a bottle. Inside was a message from a man named Chris Keenan, one of 7 men aboard the barge Plymouth, all swept away by the storm. It read, "Dear wife and children, lost 1 man yesterday. We have been out in the storm 40 hours. Goodbye, dear ones. I might see you in heaven. Pray for me. Chris K." In the days after the storm, Captain Ed McConkey's wife and family waited for news of his fate.
At my grandmother's house, she hoped and prayed that, perhaps Ed will call on the phone any minute saying, I'm fine, I weathered the storm, I'm in Goderich, everybody's fine. But of course, they didn't get that call.
The following summer, in August of 1914, Captain Ed McConkey's body washed ashore on the Michigan side of Lake Huron. Inside the captain's uniform were his gold watch and his diary. His body was sent back to Ontario for burial. The captain's wife, Amanda, carefully dried out the pages of her husband's journal. His last entry was on November 7th, just before the storm appeared over the lakes. His thoughts from November 9th, the day the Regina foundered, went unrecorded. The final tally from the Great Storm of 1913 was staggering. 12 vessels lost with all hands, 25 others wrecked, as many as 273 dead. The storm's legacy would be indelible. generations of Great Lakes mariners would compare all other November witches against its epic dimensions. Exactly 62 years later, the lakes would once again be visited by a terrible November witch, claiming the Great Lakes' largest and most famous victim, the Edmund Fitzgerald. Shipwrecks on the Great Lakes will be back in a moment, here on the History Channel.
Car's all packed. Wow. Guess this is it.
College. We're proud of you.
Oh, thanks, Dad.
We want you to have this.
What? Dad.
You're gonna need it.
In here, Alex.
Mom, the microwave?
Well, sweetie, you have to eat.
Take the TV.
Oh, come
Dad.
Let's go.
Cool. Okay, Mom.
Call us.
See you later.
Bye. Why'd you guys give him all our stuff?
Look! Ta-da! Look,
It's time to bring a little fun to life.
I bet your brother wishes he was here to help.
Best Buy.
Oh, I'm in a better mood already.
All right, listen up. Coach's plane is stuck in Idaho. But since it's our first bowl game...
Coach?
All right. Wait a second. Yeah.
Get in there and hit somebody now! Baby, go! No, somebody get him! They didn't come to play today. First down!
Presenting video conferencing.
I have to go in there and do it for you!
Because sometimes it's not just what you say, but how you say it. Kinko's. Express yourself.
Select road. Validating tires.
What kind of road can you drive on with BF Goodrich tires?
Approved. Enjoy.
Any road you choose. BF Goodrich tires. Take control.
Tonight on the History Channel, relive the 444 days of crisis in Iran. Hear from the people whose lives became entangled in 1979 as Peter Jennings recounts his personal experience covering that turbulent time. Then, prominent leaders and thinkers ponder the radical changes of the past and contemplate the future. The century concludes with the evolution of revolution. Tonight at 10 Eastern, 11 Pacific on the History Channel.
Introducing Intel's email postcard on the Kodak Picture CD. You'll find a reason to send one.
Meet the first woman ever to run for president. They called her Mrs. Satan. From the History Channel, the official network of every millennium, this is Time Lab 2000. In May of 1872, the Equal Rights Party nominates Victoria Woodhull for president, before women even have the vote. Woodhull delights in defying convention and breaking down barriers. She's already been America's first female stockbroker and newspaper publisher, and the first woman to testify before Congress. Woodhull goes on to create a national scandal. When her paper exposes a famous preacher's infidelity, she's jailed for pornography, and critics start calling her Mrs. Satan. The fact is, this extraordinary woman eventually marries not the devil, but an English banker, and lives out her final years as a respected member of the British upper class. For the History Channel, I'm Sam Waterston.
We now return to shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. The storm of 1913 brought unparalleled destruction to the Great Lakes, with 12 vessels lost and more than 270 fatalities. Succeeding decades saw other deadly storms on the lakes, claiming their share of twisted wrecks and lost lives.
Victim of one of the Great Lakes' worst shipping disasters, the freighter Carl D. Bradley. The ship had broken up under the pounding of one of the lake's vicious early November storms. Of 35 men aboard, all but 2 perished. 17 bodies were recovered in the grim search.
But by the 1970s, shipwrecks on the Great Lakes were generally thought of as tragedies of a bygone era. Newer vessels were over 700 feet long, wider and sturdier than the old boats, outfitted with radar and modern communication equipment. Yet with all that progress in the industry, one constant remained: the power of the lakes. On Sunday, November 9th, 1975, exactly 62 years after the 1913 storm, another infamous November witch would hit the Great Lakes. Its single victim would be the Edmund Fitzgerald. She was launched in 1958 amid tremendous fanfare at Detroit's River Rouge shipyard. With her gargantuan 729-foot hull, the Edmund Fitzgerald was the largest boat ever to grace the Great Lakes. She seemed the very embodiment of invincibility.
This huge, remarkable vessel that commanded the respect of almost every other lake boat warranted a salute by other vessels that passed her. It was something magical about the Edmund Fitzgerald.
By 1975, the Fitz, as she was known, was in her prime. No longer the biggest vessel on the lakes, she was still one of the most important and respected. Her crew of 29 was experienced and sure, led by Captain Ernest McSorley, a veteran of 44 years on the Great Lakes. First Mate Jack McCarthy had 40 years' experience and supervised the loading and unloading of the Fitz's cargo. Watchman Ransom Cundy, nicknamed Handsome Ransom, was a former Marine and another lifelong seaman. At 2 p.m. on Sunday, November 9th, the Edmund Fitzgerald departed out of Superior, Wisconsin. She was carrying 26,000 tons of iron ore destined for the auto plants of Detroit. Ahead was a routine 750-mile, two-day trip. The temperature was unseasonably mild, 70 degrees with light breezes. Forecasts were predicting an ordinary autumn storm.
And it was supposed to pass out over the lake and bring a little bit of rain, and then eventually behind it a little bit of snow, just a traditional passage of a storm. And it wasn't forecast to be anything too spectacular.
At about 3:30, the Fitzgerald was joined by another large freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson. The Anderson's captain, Bernie Cooper, established radio contact with Captain McSorley of the Fitzgerald. The two shared the standard information, including their knowledge of the coming storm. By 5 p.m., the Weather Service had issued warnings for winds up to 45 miles per hour. Captains McSorley and Cooper agreed to change course, staying closer to the shelter of Lake Superior's northern shore. Just after midnight, the temperature on Lake Superior plummeted to 37 degrees. Winds reached 60 miles per hour, and waves crested at 15 feet. What had been forecast as a routine storm had turned into a nasty November witch. The men in Fitzgerald's pilot house were concerned but confident. The Fitz had punched her way through many such gales. Her 3/4-inch thick steel plates were designed to flex and bend with churning seas. She slogged on through the night. The following day, Monday, November 10th, the storm was still raging. Early in the afternoon, both the Arthur Anderson and the Edmund Fitzgerald had made the turn at the top of the lake and were approaching the channel between the Canadian islands Caribou and Michipicoten. The shallows north of Caribou Island were a hazard well known to all lake captains. Less than 40 feet deep, Their treacherous rocks could easily rip a fatal tear in the hull of a passing vessel. The Fitzgerald was about 15 miles ahead of the Anderson. Just before 3 p.m., Captain Cooper peered into his radar screen and was surprised to see the Fitzgerald sailing dangerously close to the shallows.
It started to snow at that time, and of course we didn't see anything of them. All we had was just radar checks on them. The first mate and myself, we were eyeballing the radar. It looked to us as if he was in closer than what we wanted to be.
Just after passing the shallows, McSorley radioed the Anderson.
He called me up, that was 3:10 in the afternoon. And he said, I've got a little problem. I've taken a starboard list.
At 4 p.m., the Anderson registered wind gusts of 100 miles per hour. 10 minutes later, Captain McSorley reported that both the Fitz's radar units had been disabled by the storm. At Whitefish Point, about 45 miles away, a power failure took out both the lighthouse light and its radio beacon, a vital navigational aid for boats on the lake.
McSorley had lost both of his radar. Then suddenly, the beacon at Whitefish Point went out, which meant he was blind and had to rely solely on the Anderson to tell him where he was and whether or not he was free of any danger of collision.
McSorley ordered the engine room to slow down, allowing the Anderson to close the distance between them. Sailing blind on a darkening afternoon in huge seas and blowing snow, Captain McSorley was facing the test of his life.
He sounded tired on the telephone, but I'm sure that he wasn't about to. You just can't panic the crew. You got to keep your mouth shut. You got to work around that somehow. And I like every other captain, I think you think your ship was infallible.
The Anderson shadowed the Fitz from 9 miles behind her, guiding her through the treacherous seas. The vessels plowed onward, gradually making headway, but the Fitz was in grave danger. Unbeknownst to her crew, slowly, imperceptibly at first, the Fitzgerald was sinking. Shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. We'll be back in a moment, here on the History Channel.
We thought of them when we gave it a more powerful V8 than any top-selling Ford or Dodge pickup. We thought of them when we gave it a bigger extended cab than Ford F-150 or Dodge Ram. Maybe that's why Motor Trend thought of us. The new Chevy Silverado. It's the truck. The Motor Trend Truck of the Year.
Okay, with AT&T's new one-rate 7-cent plan, now your calls all day, every day are just 7 cents a minute.
Yeah? What about those nickel plans?
Okay, it's not always a nickel.
It's not.
During the day, that nickel can cost you a quarter.
Making it no longer a nickel.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, but with AT&T, it's simple.
It's always 7 cents a minute.
24 hours a day?
Yes.
Every day?
Yes.
7 days, 7 cents?
Yes.
Do you want to explain it to him again?
I don't.
All day, every day. Call 1-800-41-RATE to enroll.
It was called the Forgotten War. We will remember the Korean War, beginning September 20th only on the History Channel. Tomorrow on the History Channel, they were America's spies in the skies.
We now know that the United States flew more than 10,000 missions over communist territory.
Find out why so many disappeared. Top secret spy planes of the Cold War on History Undercover with Arthur Kent. Tomorrow at 10 Eastern, 11 Pacific, only on the History Channel. One of Germany's best-kept war secrets, an encoding machine meant to puzzle and obscure until the Allies found a way to break the unbreakable, the Ultra Enigma, unsworn to secrecy. Tomorrow at 9 Eastern, 10 Pacific, only on the History Channel. From primitive rafts to giant battleships, trace the evolution of ships, the great ships, high-tech, high seas. All next week on the History Channel.
Now back to shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. Late in the afternoon of Monday, November 10th, 1975, the wounded ore carrier Edmund Fitzgerald was struggling against a monstrous storm on Lake Superior. Wave heights had reached 30 feet, and the wind was gusting to more than 90 miles per hour. Fitzgerald's veteran captain, Ernest McSorley, reported, "We are taking heavy seas over our decks. It's the worst sea I've ever been in." The freighter Arthur M. Anderson still trailed the Fitz by 9 miles, maintaining radio contact and keeping track of her on radar. Both boats were heading for the safety of Whitefish Bay at the lower end of Lake Superior, just 35 miles away. Captain McSorley remained stoic over the radio waves, but he knew that if things got worse, his options were few.
The nearest Coast Guard boat that can survive the storm is in Duluth, Minnesota, fully a day away from his position. He's got Coast Guard aircraft available out of Traverse City, Michigan, perhaps 2.5, 3 hours away. And in the middle of a 75-mile or 80-mile-an-hour wind, there's no way they could perform a rescue mission on his ship.
The huge seas made launching lifeboats impossible.
Undoubtedly, McSorley felt that his only chance was to make Whitefish Bay, and that he was praying that the boat would stay afloat long enough that he could do that and beach her in the calm waters of the bay.
At 7 p.m., the Anderson picked up Whitefish Point on radar about 25 miles away. Cooper radioed McSorley, "We haven't got far to go. We will soon have it made." Exhausted, McSorley replied, "Yes, we will." Just then, a snow squall descended. At 7:10, the Anderson's first mate radioed McSorley, "How are you making out with your problems?" McSorley's reply, "We are holding our own." By 7:25 p.m., the Anderson's first mate had lost radar contact with the Fitz. He picked up other vessels further off in the distance, but the area where the Fitz should have appeared, about 9 miles due south, was blank. The proudest boat on the Great Lakes had simply disappeared. There had been no distress call, no mayday, nothing. Captain Cooper and the others peered through binoculars across the waves, looking for the Fitz's running lights. One crewman spotted a single light in the distance. Cooper saw nothing. He tried to raise the Fitzgerald on the radio. No response. He then radioed other vessels in the area, asking if they had seen or heard from the Fitz. They had not. By 8:25 p.m., Cooper feared the worst. He notified the Coast Guard at Sault Ste. Marie.
Standby one, let me get the Arthur Anderson on this frequency. He is the vessel that reported seeing the Fitzgerald disappear from his radar screen, and he was the last one that was in radar contact with him. The thing about it was, we come up there, we called the Fitzgerald to check on him and see how he was doing, and the last contact we had with him, he said, well, he was going along fine and holding his own and no problem.
About 8:45, the Arthur Anderson made it safely to Whitefish Bay. A pall hung over the pilot house. The men were feeling a mix of relief and numbness. The Coast Guard had no vessels in the area that could withstand the 30-foot seas. It dispatched helicopters to the scene and asked nearby freighters, including the Anderson, to search for any signs of the Fitzgerald.
Do you think there's any possibility that you could come about and go back there and do any searching? Over. Oh, God, I don't know. The sea out there is tremendously large, and God, I'm afraid that I'm going to take a hell of a beating out there on it.
I was reluctant to go, really I was. But he said there's a ship on the bottom, and I felt like saying there could be two if I go back, you know, but I finally decided I'd go out.
The Anderson and the freighter William Clay Ford bravely turned back into the maelstrom to search for the Fitz and her crew, knowing full well that the chance of finding survivors was slim at best. On land, the families of Fitzgerald's crew watched the storm and worried.
And the wind was howling terrible, and the trees were just bending, and it was so gray. I had gotten the kids for bed, and I was watching TV, and they said that there was a ship missing in Lake Superior. And naturally, the first thing I thought was about my dad, and I went to bed praying that he was safe.
By the following morning, November 11th, word of the disaster had made the news.
I turned on the TV, and the first thing that I saw was the headline that the Fitzgerald was missing. To see that and know that your dad is gone, it was horrible.
The Anderson and the William Clay Ford found no sign of survivors and returned to port. 400 miles to the south, at Detroit's Mariners Church, Father Richard Ingalls tolled the bell 29 times, once for each man on the Fitz.
I felt deeply for the family. The empathy was, at times, almost crushing, because they had lost their loved ones, and they had a great burden of not being able to see them. And I used the psalm, "Out of the deep have I called unto thee, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. My soul fleeth unto the Lord before the morning watch."
Coast Guard vessels continued to search for survivors. But after 3 days, Lake Superior surrendered only a few ominous remnants of the Fitzgerald, including her mutilated lifeboats. Where the Fitz was believed to have gone down, the Coast Guard found a single oil-coated life ring.
And you start thinking of the families. You know, if it were your family, or if it were you waiting for some word, you want to find somebody or something that you can take back to them. And we found nothing, not a thing.
The loss of the Fitzgerald was an absolute shock to the Great Lakes maritime community. And for her to be lost under mysterious circumstances with all hands in the middle of a Lake Superior storm just was something that could not be comprehended.
In the aftermath of the stunning tragedy, the Coast Guard turned its attention to the cause, launching an extensive investigation that would only add to the mystery of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Back in a moment with shipwrecks on the Great Lakes, here on the History Channel.
Sleek, sophisticated, stylish, and yet with an exhilarating V6. Chevy Monte Carlo lets you express that hidden part of your personality, just dying to get out.
Mr. Kramer, how are you? Tommy?
Monte Carlo. The side you show the world is up to you.
Get low APR financing or $2,500 cash back on a new '99 Monte Carlo.
Do you need fast allergy relief? Then you need the power of Zyrtec. Prescription Zyrtec starts working fast and last 24 hours. In studies, drowsiness was the most common side effect. Others included fatigue and dry mouth. Most were mild or moderate. To learn more about Zyrtec, ask your doctor or pharmacist. So when you need fast allergy relief, remember the power of Zyrtec.
When you buy a bargain basement PC, what you're really buying is a mystery box. Will there be a monitor? Probably not. Lots of software? Ha! A year on the internet, 24/7 tech support? Dream on. With a Gateway Essential PC, you know exactly what you're getting. Monitor, great software, award-winning tech support, and internet access for $28 a month, or less than $1 a day. No mystery there. Call 1-800-GATEWAY for a Gateway Essential PC with an Intel Celeron processor.
Sunday is Guts and Glory Night. Explore the history of women and guns. Then enter the shadow realm of the codemakers and breakers of Ultra Enigma, followed by Arthur Kent on top secret spy planes of the Cold War.
We now know that the United States flew more than 10,000 missions over communist territories.
Guts and Glory Sunday presents Tales of the Gun, Sworn to Secrecy, History Undercover. Tomorrow at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific on the History Channel.
Thanks.
At Geico, we work 24 hours a day. Fortunately, we're equipped for the job. Geico, a 15-minute call could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Am I on? Geico Direct could save you hundreds of dollars on car insurance. Result?
Smaller bill.
Geico, a 15-minute call could save you 15% or more.
And now the conclusion of shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. On Thursday, November 13th, 1975, the Coast Guard suspended its search for the 29 men of the ore carrier Edmund Fitzgerald. The next day, a Navy plane outfitted with magnetic detection equipment located the hulking vessel. The Fitz was broken in two, lying in 530 feet of water. She had gone down 17 miles from the safety of Whitefish Bay. On November 18th, the Coast Guard initiated an investigation that would last almost 2 years. They conducted dozens of interviews and deployed an unmanned submersible to study the wreck, taking over 800 photographs and recording hours of videotape. In July 1977, the Coast Guard finally released its report. But there would be no stunning revelation, no telltale disclosure to explain the loss of the legendary Edmund Fitzgerald. The report concluded that the officers and crew of the Fitz had performed properly in the crisis. It also pointed out that the Fitzgerald's hatches were overdue for maintenance, and that they may have been improperly fastened, leading to topside flooding of the vessel.
And the theory was that during the height of the storm, the seas boarding Fitzgerald's spar deck and rolling along over top of the hatches were flooding through these ineffective hatch closers and entering the cargo hold. And that, in effect, was forcing Fitzgerald lower and lower and lower in the water until finally there was no buoyancy left, and Fitz simply dove into a wave and disappeared.
The Coast Guard theory was admittedly inconclusive. It was also controversial, especially considering Fitzgerald's experienced crew, men such as First Mate Jack McCarthy, who supervised the hatch closings.
People who knew Jack McCarthy, who was the first mate, insisted that Jack McCarthy would never have allowed those hatches to be improperly secured.
The crew were competent seamen in every regard. They certainly would have made certain that their ship was seaworthy before leaving Superior.
A second theory that has gained wider acceptance is that the Fitzgerald ripped her hull on the rocks near Caribou Island. Shortly after passing the shallows, Captain McSorley reported that the Fitzgerald had taken a starboard list.
Touching on Caribou Shoal could have fractured a number of ballast tanks, both side and bottom, emitting into the ship this great deluge of water that the pumps were unable to handle. Fitzgerald doesn't realize that she's damaged because of the rocking and rolling of the ship in the storm. The impact was not apparent. She continues downbound, and she simply staggers off and suddenly sinks, diving into this wall of water. The bow plunging into the bottom of the lake. The torque twisting the stern over, cracking it off to land about 170 feet away from the bow portion.
Captain Bernie Cooper of the Arthur Anderson, the vessel following the Fitz, supported this theory. Cooper testified that his radar showed the Fitzgerald passing right over the shallows near Caribou Island.
I don't care what anybody says, at 3:10 in the afternoon, she had either bottomed out or had a stress fracture of the hull. That's the only two possibilities I have. She was sinking from that time on. My opinion is she bottomed out.
There are other theories for the disaster, yet each of these explanations remains a theory.
We know it sunk the Fitzgerald, it filled up with water and did a nosedive. But why it took on water is really the mystery. We really can't determine what caused the ship to take on water before it did its nosedive to the bottom.
In the years after the tragedy, the mystique surrounding the Fitzgerald continued to grow, yielding a hit song and turning the Fitz into a sort of freshwater Titanic. This has led to several high-profile expeditions to the wreck site.
We planned diving the Fitzgerald for some time, but nothing could prepare us for that moment when you finally came in on this huge mountain of steel out of the black, and you move in closer and closer to the pilot house itself and peer in the windows. You might see a blanket hanging out of a window, a pair of coveralls draped here, or a sweater there. It's a very sobering moment because you realize here you are at the site of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the most famous of the 6,000 ships that have gone down on the Great Lakes. You know there's 29 souls right here.
When you don't have a casket or a body, you kind of hope that eventually the body would wash ashore or, you know. But then after a while you give up that hope. You realize that it's not going to happen. And he's down there, entombed in the Fitzgerald.
Over the years, the families of the men who died on the Fitz grew disturbed by the ongoing dives to the ship's wreckage. To them, the wreck is a hallowed place, the gravesite of their husbands, fathers, and sons. Bruce Hudson was just 22 when he lost his life on the Fitz. His mother, Ruth Hudson, felt that the dives should stop. In 1994, she and other Fitzgerald family members began a campaign to have the wreck declared a gravesite, off limits to diving.
Everything has been found out that can be, and there's no reason for anyone to be going to the Fitzgerald anymore. And we just feel that it's their gravesite, and that should be respected.
In an effort to provide solace to the surviving family members, there was a proposal for one final expedition to raise the ship's bell, the soul of the vessel, and replace it with a replica bearing the names of the crew. This dive took place in July 1995. Emotions ran high as the bell broke the surface of Lake Superior after 20 years on the bottom.
One feeling I had was, it was like a part of my dad coming up. And when that bell came out the water, and it tolled right away, it rang as soon as it came out. It was like the Fitzgerald was alive again. And it's brought us all a sense of peace and unites us with our men.
The bell was restored to its original luster in honor of the men. Today, it rests quietly in the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Museum at the end of Whitefish Bay. so close to where the Edmund Fitzgerald plunged to eternity on that haunting November night in 1975. In his epic novel of seafaring, Moby Dick, Herman Melville told of the peril faced by sailors on the Great Lakes. He wrote, "These grand freshwater seas of ours possess an ocean-like expansiveness. They know what shipwrecks are, for out of sight of land, they have drowned many a midnight ship with all its shrieking crew." These words still resonate a century and a half later with the men and women who sail the Great Lakes. The tragic memory of the Edmund Fitzgerald and the loss of 30,000 lives on the Great Lakes are cause to take heed from the witches of November.
It's eerie even today, 20-some years afterwards. That ship never leaves me alone. I'm still tied to those people.
I look back on the storm of 13 and think how incredible this storm must have really been. I mean, when you think of steel-hulled ships, all in their prime, all succumb to this one particular storm. I mean, it just opened up and swallowed all these ships. It shows you what the power of Mother Nature really is all about.
Next on the History Channel, relive the 444 days of crisis in Iran. Hear from the people whose lives became entangled in 1979 as Peter Jennings recounts his personal experience covering that turbulent time. Then, prominent leaders and thinkers ponder the radical changes of the past and contemplate the future. The century concludes with the evolution of revolution. Next on the History Channel, where the past comes alive.
Now, an exclusive home video offer from the History Channel. You can own the program you've just seen for $19.95 plus shipping and handling. Call 1-800-708-1776 to order this History Channel presentation.
V6 engine in its class. The most interior space in its class. Amenities that would surprise you in any class. For those seeking refuge from mediocrity and compromise, we offer the Sanctuary.